If you are new here, my name is Catherine and I'm here to talk about books. I don't know if I should call this a book haul or what I should call it, but I went home recently to New Jersey and I have a ton of books at my parents' house. Like all my books from middle school, high school, college years are all kind of hanging out there. And there's been some that I was like, oh, I want to read that book again. I really want that book just in my possession and with me. So when I last went home, I was only home for a weekend, but I brought like a big suitcase and I brought a ton of books back so that I could have them with me in my apartment and just continue to fill my small space with more and more books. There's stacks piling up. These are books that I got after I filmed my bookshelf tour, so if you saw that, these are new additions. These are now books that are part of my bookshelf, and there's some that I've already gotten rid of from that haul. So if you haven't watched that, I recommend go watching it. But anyway, you want to see this giant stack I got, this fat stack. These are all the books I brought back with me. So this is a haul in some cases, but I didn't spend a single dime on these books, which feels pretty great. These are all just books that have been quietly waiting for my return at my parents' house, and now they're back with me. Some of these I want to reread again very soon. Some I just want to keep in the house and because they're classics, and I'm trying to build up my classics repertoire, my library, if you will. So anyway, let's get started. Let's go through these. Where to put? I think I'll put. Yeah, let's get started. First we have The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. I read this in high school. I read this going into sophomore year, and I remember being like, I was not that into it. I remember kind of being like, this is like a whiny boy, and I don't, like, if I met him, I wouldn't like him. I was very turned off by Holden Caulfield, so I wasn't a big fan of this book. But recently, I believe it was for their book club, booktubers Emmy and Carolyn read this book, and they fell back in love. I think it was Emma's first time reading it, and it was Carolyn's second time, but Carolyn had always hated it. But then they loved it. Like, they really loved this book. And so now that I'm a little bit older, a little more mature, I've read more things, I think I can give it another chance. I think I will want to read it again, and just to own it, just to have it. And this is just such an iconic book, such an iconic cover. I think it's due for a reread. I think I might have a different take on it now, different appreciation. So, Catcher in the Rye. Oh, by the way, I don't know if you noticed, but I got a haircut, which means I'm gonna stop going that I have been doing in these videos because I can't see because my bangs are in my face. But now, that's not an issue. Now they're nice and out of my way. Next is Dr. Shivago by Boris Pasternak. I love this edition. I always, whenever I think of Dr. Shivago, I think of this specific edition because I just think it's really beautiful. I read this, or tried to read this, asterisk, in high school. This was the first Russian novel I ever attempted to read, and I was very confused. I did not understand the Russian naming system at all. The patronymics, the nicknames were really throwing me off. Many times I did not know who was speaking. Oh, this is the same character, I didn't even know. I was very confused. It wasn't until I read Anna Karenina that really clicked, the naming system really clicked for me, and I suddenly realized, oh, Katerina is also Kitty, is also Kitty Ivanova. Like, I was like, oh, this is all the same person. Whereas I think I read this, or tried to read this, I keep saying tried to read this, because technically I got through it, but what did I get out of it? I don't know. I don't remember much about this book at all, just that it's about the Russian Revolution and about a doctor. It's a very classic, very, very classic Russian novel, and I remember just being like, oh, this wasn't that great, and it wasn't until I read Anna Karenina that I was like, oh, Russian novels. Oh, I get it now. And now I've read many and I love them. So I think this book definitely deserves a reread at this point, definitely deserves a second chance. I'll be approaching this like I've never read it because, again, I don't really remember it at all and I have no emotional attachment to it, so we're giving it another shot. Boris Pasternak deserves another shot. I did him dirty because I was 15 and did not know what the hell was going on. Next is actually technically a book that wasn't mine, it was my sister's. My sister is getting into reading, which I really love, but she historically has not been a very big reader. So she had books in her room, and then she was kind of like, oh, we can get rid of some of these. And I was like, can I take this one? And she went, yes. And it's Educated by Tara Westover. This has been a huge book. I just jumped on the bandwagon with this one. I know everybody loves this book, I know this has been read, but I've just never gotten to it, and I've never had a copy, but now I have my sister's old copy. It's a memoir. It's about a woman who grew up homeschooled. Her parents were kind of doomsday people. They were very isolationists, very much like the people in Ruby Ridge. This is about her finally leaving that environment and going into the world of higher education and realizing, oh, there's this whole other world out there, which is fascinating to me. I think that's just such an interesting story. And again, this is the type of person who wouldn't be famous otherwise, but just has a very interesting life. And I want to know more. So I've always wanted to read this, and now I have a copy. So thanks, Caroline. Thank you. Next is a very, very special classic for all those weird girlies out there. It's The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. I read this in high school and I remember loving it. Like, I would hold it with me as I like walked to and from class. I'd read it underneath the table. Like, I was very devoted to this book because I felt not seen necessarily. I don't think my mental health was as in much of a predicament as the woman is in this book. But I still just felt seen. It was like, she's nailing what it's like to be observed as a woman, just to be a woman in more of a male field. I felt this was telling me things that no one had ever communicated to me before. And just props to Sylvia Plath for writing the best opening line of all time. It was a queer, sultry summer, the summer they electrocuted the Rosenbergs, and I didn't know what I was doing in New York. I remember reading that and being like, tell me everything, Sylvia. Tell it to me. Like, I was so intrigued. And so I definitely want to read this again at some point. Don't know when. I have so many books that I haven't read yet that I want to get to, but I know I want to read this again at some point because I would hope that I still have the same kind of attachment to this book as I did when I was 15 and 16 and thought life sucked. But this is this is a classic. If you haven't read The Bell Jar, highly recommend. Next is a book that is unfortunately controversial, and it really shouldn't be, because if you know the book and you read it with the right lens on it, it's not, and it's actually making quite cogent points. It's Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. This book will get unnecessary flack because of the content. However, you have to realize that who is telling the story is what is informing the story. So this is the story of Humbert Humbert. He is our narrator, and he goes to live, he's basically like a boarder at this woman's house, and he falls in love with the boarder's daughter, who's like, I think 10 or 11 at the start of the book. And that alone, obviously, is controversial, but it's because of Humbert Humbert's just completely despicable nature, and his nature as an unreliable narrator is what is giving the whole book its meaning. I read this in high school again. I remember picking it up at Barnes & Noble, my mom being like, and I was like, no, I'm gonna read it. And I loved it. Like, the writing in this is absolutely brilliant. The writing style, the way the story unfolds, it's so amazing. And so I definitely want to read this book again. When I will, I don't know. I just remember being so absorbed by this story, and not in a way that made me go, I want to be with a 40-year-old man. No, honestly, it just made me horrified, which is kind of the point. So, Lolita. Highly recommend. If you have not picked this up, I highly recommend. Next is a really great spooky classic. Sometimes it's often in editions with other stories, but this edition I have is just the story. It's Henry James's The Turn of the Screw. First of all, the children on this cover, I always had to like bury this book. I couldn't have this book on top. I had to always bury this book under other books because these children scare the absolute daylights out of me. But they should. They should. So if you're not familiar with the story, this is Henry James's take on a ghost story. A governess goes to teach these two children whose names are Miles and Flora, and something is going on. Like, something's going on in this house, and this woman is like, what is happening? Are the children haunted? Is the house haunted? Is she losing her mind? You decide. Vote at home. But that is what makes the story just so brilliant, because you're never sure, and it's never really conclusive at the end either what it was. And Henry James is not usually known for ghost stories, but he wrote one banger of a story. Like, he did one and he went, mic drop, that's it, that's all I got, and everyone went, that's amazing. I've read a lot of his other works and it's nothing like this, but this is so fun. Such a great story. This I might just pick up in October because it's such a short read, just over 100 pages, so I may just pick it up just for fun because it's been so long since I've read this. But again, read this in high school and loved it. So, Turn of the Screw, Henry James. Classique! Next. Of this, I've never read. I got this because I studied AP Psych in high school and I got really into it. And so for Christmas, my mom got me this book and I just always had it on my shelves and it looks very official, but I've never read it. It's The Story of Psychology by Morton Hunt. Love this cover. It's just very plain, and it has the kind of phrenology guy at the top. And it's just the history. It's not so much delving into the specifics of psychology. It's more so the history of the study of psychology, the different schools of thought, the leading figures in psychology, and how it's come to be the field that it is today. And I just find that absolutely fascinating, because obviously we've had our minds and we've had our psyches throughout human existence, but only really recently have we really been like, we should study what the mind does. We should figure out what this brain does. Why do people act the way they do? It's really only a recent phenomenon that we've really started to figure out what all of that is. So this book kind of takes you through what the history of psychology is. Absolutely fascinating. So I will get to this eventually. This one's big. This one, yeah, it's like 700 pages. So this one is a lot, but I can see myself just picking this up just to have like a big nonfiction book to have in the background to kind of go through piecemeal. So we will get to this eventually. I finally brought this with me. This is a classic. This is such a beloved classic and such a short one that if you've never read this, I recommend just picking it up just on a whim. It's The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros. This is an excellent book. This is often taught in schools. It's often kind of considered young adult because it speaks, I think, to young people so beautifully, but you can be any age and read this. Like, I think anyone at any age can enjoy this. This is just like snippets, little stories of Esperanza Cordero, and she's growing up in Chicago, which that's where I am now, which makes me want to read this because I'm like, oh, it'll connect me a little bit to it. I just remember loving these. Like, they're so a lot of these stories are so short, so like such snippets, but they're beautifully rendered. And the way she's able to do those little snippets in such a short time is very impressive. And I just remember really loving this, and it's time for me to go back to this. So if you've never read this book, you have to. It's just so good. So I'm happy I have it back with me because I don't know, this is such an old copy, but I love it, and I don't know why. But she's with me now. The next is also a book that was from my sister's library. I think she took like a Middle Eastern literature class, and so I was like, oh, this book looks interesting, and she let me keep it. It's Diary of a Country Prosecutor by Tawfiq al-Hakim. I really know nothing about this. First of all, I just liked the cover because it was super colorful and seemed kind of summery. Basically, who shot Kamar al-Dawal al-Wan? Was it a crime of passion? Was it the role of the beautiful peasant girl Rim? Is the mysterious Sheikh Asfur as crazy as he seems? Diary of a Country Prosecutor is an Egyptian comedy of errors. So I was like, that seems interesting. I've never heard of this book. I've never heard anyone talk about this book. That just seems interesting to me. And it's very rare that I do pick up books that aren't already on my TBR, because my TBR is massive, but also ones I've never heard of. I'm like, oh, I've never heard of this book. And just reading that, I'm like, it actually seems very fun. I don't often read fun or funny, so this might just be a good departure from what I usually read. And it's short. It's like 120 pages. So, Diary of a Country Prosecutor. I don't know. But we'll see. Next is a beloved one. Next is a beloved book. You can tell because I have many little tabs in the sides, and they're all sun drenched because they sat on my windowsill in high school because I was romantic. It's my E.E. Cummings selected poems. I knew this was hanging out at my house. I knew it was somewhere, and I was like, you know, I just want this book near me again. I have my beloved copy of Selected Poems by Langston Hughes with me here at the apartment, and I was like, I need my E.E. Cummings book back because I used to flip through and read these poems in high school all the time. I absolutely loved his poetry. It's very touching to like read the little poems that I tabbed because it's a little bit of a snapshot. I'm like, oh, that's a poem that like when I was 16 like really meant something to me. Somewhere I've never traveled, gladly beyond any experience, your eyes have their silence. In your most frail gesture are things which enclose me, or which I cannot touch because they are too near. Your slightest look easily will unclose me, though I have closed myself as fingers. You open always petal by petal myself as spring opens, touching skillfully, mysteriously her first rose. Okay. No, but I've always loved these poems, so I just want to keep these almost like as a bedside table book, just so I can flip through them. So, my E.E. Cummings book, you're home! You're finally home! Next, when I went through my bookshelf tour, I realized I did have a solo copy of this book, but I wanted to keep the book with me that I read from when I read this book, and it's just a really nice edition. It's the cloth-bound edition of Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. One of my favorite books of all time. This is one of the best books of all time. You can fight me. It's one of the best. It's definitely one of Charles Dickens's best. It follows Pip, the orphan, as he starts from very humble means and he comes into a fortune and is becoming a gentleman and navigating class in Victorian England. That's like the very truncated version. Obviously, if it's a Dickens novel, there's tons of characters and tons of side plots, and there's so much richness in this novel. And I absolutely love this edition. It's cloth bound, it's gorgeous. I got it at the Strand in New York for $2. Unheard of. Isn't that those carts on the outside that are usually like books that are $1 to $3, and this one was $2. Look, oh, I still have the tag. You can't really see it, but it says Strand price, $2. So yeah, I'm just very happy to have this particular edition with me, because if I have a cloth bound, I should probably have it with me, because they're so pretty. They're so beautiful to display. So, Great Expectations. Next is a book that isn't often talked about, but should be talked about more. The movie is excellent, and that's how I learned about the story, but then I read the book. It's We Need to Talk About Kevin by Lionel Shriver. If you haven't read this, or at least seen the movie, recommend. Highly, highly recommend. This is the story, basically the movie isn't told this way, but the book is epistolary. I know I'm gonna get that right, epistolary. This is an epistolary novel. This woman is writing letters to her husband, and she's writing letters about their son, Kevin. Do you mind? She's writing to her husband about their son, Kevin, and she's always had sort of a very stormy, troubled relationship with Kevin. They've never quite clicked. He was her first child, but she never really felt motherly or felt connected to him, and she couldn't figure out why. And there is something that Kevin does, which I will not spoil if you don't know it, but there's something that Kevin does that is so egregious and so terrible that she has to confront it, and she has to confront herself as a mother and the issues she's had with herself, but also with her child and the issues her child has. And she's doing that by writing to her husband about it in letters. So good. So, so, so good. And the movie has Tilda Swinton, who's one of my favorites, one of my favorite actors of all time. So this is the second book that I own that has Tilda Swinton on it. Usually I don't like movie tie-in covers, but I'll make the exception for Tilda Swinton. I will probably, if I reread this, I'll do a comparison of the movie and the book, because they're both excellent. So, we need to talk about Kevin. We need to talk about Kevin. We absolutely do, because we don't talk about it enough on BookTube. Next is a very classic, more of a contemporary classic. It's Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. I read this summer. I was doing an internship. This was actually a great book to bring when you are kind of like living on the water, kind of living in what felt like a summer camp type environment, but it was a theater, a summer stock theater. So actually kind of the perfect one to bring, because it was very nostalgic, very wistful. It just felt at times very cozy, but also removed, which I think Haruki Murakami is able to do really well. This is basically about this young man who falls in love with this woman, and she is having kind of issues of her own and is staying in a mental institution after the death of a mutual friend of theirs and her ex-boyfriend. And this is the first Murakami I've ever read. It's actually the only Murakami I've ever read. And I really enjoyed it. I really liked it. And if I start to get more Murakami books, I kind of want to keep them all together. So I wanted to get my copy of Norwegian Wood. I also just think this cover design is amazing, because Norwegian Wood is obviously referencing the Beatles song, and it kind of is reminiscent of like John Lennon glasses. Brilliant. Definitely recommend, while you read this, listen to the Rubber Soul album. Excellent, because that's Norwegian Wood is from Rubber Soul. It's not my favorite. It's one of my favorite Beatles albums, and it goes so well with this book. So we'll read this again at some point, but I mostly just wanted to keep this book with me. Ooh. And the last is not a beach read, but I have read it at the beach. And you can say whatever you want about that. It's The Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. This was also one that I went to Barnes & Noble with my parents and went, okay, here's the books I want. As we're checking out, my mom went, oh, are you sure you want to get that one? And I went, yeah, yeah, I'm sure. Excellent. This book is excellent. This really shows you what you can do with language and how to almost create your own language and not tell anybody how it works. Just start the story and have them dive in head first to it and make you figure out how to read this as you go along. And so I remember I read this in high school, and I remember kind of reading it and the first chapter being like, what is going on? Like, he's calling things droogs and crovy, and I don't even know what these words are. But then you get into the rhythm, and then I was like, then it became almost second nature. I knew the shorthand. I knew exactly how to read it. And the fact a book could do that at the time, like, blew my mind. And this is a very disturbing story. This is not for the light of heart. This is a very dark book. It's very transgressive, but I love a transgressive book. The movie scarred me. I'm just gonna say it. The movie scarred me. It is not also for the faint of heart. I would really caution watching it. Maybe watch it with a trusted friend nearby. It did scar me, but a masterpiece in its own right. You can have your opinions on Stanley Kubrick, but the dude was kind of a genius. The book and the movie are a little bit different, I would say, but equally disturbing. But I would want to read this again. I really would want to read this again. Just give myself enough time to chill out. There was me, that is Alex, and my 3 droogs, that is Pete, Georgie, and Dim. Dim being really dim, as we sat in the Corova milk bar making up our Rossadukes what to do with the evening. A flip dark chill winter bastard through dry. The Corova milk bar was a milk plus mesto, and you may, oh my brothers, have forgotten what these mestos were like. Things changing so scory these days, and everybody very quick to forget. Newspapers not being read much neither. So that's how it opens, and I remember being like, because it's at times so British and then so not British that you're like, I don't know what just happened. So that's Clockwork Orange. I just kind of want to have this book nearby in case I do want to read this again, and I know my boyfriend wanted to take this home. He wanted to read it, so woohoo! Ending on a real fun note there. But thank you. I wanted to make this video just kind of short and sweet and just show you how I shopped my stash, so to speak. That's something that beauty YouTubers use all the time. They like go through their own things and shop their own stash. And to an extent, that's what I did here. I looked at the books I already owned that I had missed and really wanted to keep with me, and I took them back with me. They flew from New Jersey to Chicago to be here with me. I'll show you my spoils again, just for fun. Knowledge! But yeah, that's about it for me. If you like any of these books, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to know your opinions on them. Some are obviously ones that people don't love, some are very beloved classics. So let me know what you think. If you have any books that you have at your parents' house that you want back, comment below. Tag your parents, say, I want my books back. That's what I did. I went and I got them back. But yeah, that'll be it for me for this one. Like, comment, subscribe, do what you want to do. And I'm gonna be here and I'll be talking about books next time. Bye.